Alright, you saw the thumbnail and the title of the video, so you probably already know what it's about, but this is going to be Creature Archives Thermoradiosaurus versus Goji Center's Indominus 2.0. Nature's ultimate apex predator versus a man-made disaster. Anyways, both of these creatures are made to be kind of a different take on a fictional animal, with Thermoradiosaurus being made to be essentially about as close as you can get to Godzilla in real life, and Indom 2.0 just being, well, Indominus Rex 2.0. Both of them have some pretty complicated scaling if we were to really go into that, but for this video I'm going to be focusing more on the realism parts. The main reason I'm going more realism here than I am usually doing in other videos is largely because how these two channels usually are with how they do things. Both of these are meant to be based pretty much in reality for the most part. And although stuff from Jurassic World and stuff like that can alter things, and there's some things that the realistic Godzilla did that are kind of insane for a real animal to be capable of doing, I'm still going to be focusing as much as I can on more realistic than just full-on power scaling here. Kind of like what I did with the Jurassic Rexes in Hell Creek. Anyway, yeah, this is essentially just like a Spinosaurus versus a T-Rex if both of them were on, like, super steroids. The best way I can describe this fight. I'll be breaking this down to a few categories. Obviously, the one that wins the majority of categories is likely going to be the winner, but I'll explain who I think would win in a 1v1 fight at the end. I also have an alternate scenario where I have stronger, I'll call it variants of both species and other variants that we know of. Essentially, I'll have a juvenile of both species go up against each other, and then I'll have a Indominus 2.0 with a pack of offspring versus the super, like, overpowered Thermoradiosaurus that lives in Chernobyl. So there'll be 3 fights, but the main fight is going to be just an average individual from both species. Starting off with corporal build, this one, I guess you can say it's kind of debatable, but in my opinion it really isn't. Thermoradiosaurus is just so much bigger than Indom 2.0 that saying that Indom 2.0 has a shot at beating it in just raw build, I feel is kind of insane. Indominus 2.0 is around 43 feet long on average and around 18 feet tall. Whether that's at the hip or at the head is never explained, but I'm going to assume that's at the head, seeing as if it was that tall at the hip, it would be significantly taller than Rexy, and we know it's probably not off some, like, size comparisons we've gotten of it. So I don't know. Maybe it is that tall at the hip, but regardless, though, it's definitely smaller than the 75 plus foot long, over 24 foot tall at the hip super Spinosaurus it's going up against. And then, although it does have longer ape-like arms than Thermoradiosaurus has, it's still not that big of a difference when there's such a size gap there. If they were the same size, Indominus 2.0 does technically have the better build for, like, a fight on land, but if they were to go in the water, obviously the Spinosaur has a pretty big edge there. And even with Indom 2.0 having pound for pound better weapons, they still have pretty much all the same stuff for the most part, besides venom and obviously the X factor that the Spinosaur has. If you've seen the video on it, you know what I'm talking about. So, generally speaking, just off size alone, build would have to go to Thermoradiosaurus, because it's like comparing a bear to a wolf, essentially. Next we have intelligence, and this one's also pretty clear cut. The Thermoradiosaurus isn't dumb. It's actually pretty smart, and everything we know of it from the video implies it's definitely the smartest Spinosaur by a pretty significant margin. They're also smart enough to even outsmart people in combat, but not, like, insanely outsmart them. They have fought and pretty much defeated people many times before in the kind of lore for it. In fact, I believe a human's never actually successfully killed one, like, with weapons or anything. Of course, I doubt they've tried nuking them or shooting them with high-powered rifles or anything, but ancient humans with spears and swords and boats and all that have never actually managed to bring an adult one of these down. The only times that humans have actually managed to bring one of these down is juveniles by essentially trapping or poisoning them. And sometimes the juveniles still manage to mess a bunch of people up after that happens, as you'll see when I talk about the X Factor, as it's a juvenile that really goes crazy with that X Factor. Meaning the adults should be able to go a lot crazier with it. But when it comes to raw intelligence, they really just aren't that impressive compared to something that is roughly comparable to a bonobo. So, yeah, obviously Indominus Rex, which can use weapons, is pretty much a second only to humans and is generally just considered a smarter animal, is going to be the smarter of the two. But it's not so big of a gap that it completely wins the fight for the Indom. It's not like it's like completely outsmarting it every time. It's still an animal. But it's definitely the smarter of the two. Next we have maneuverability and speed. I'm putting these both together. On land, it's no contest. The Indom 2.0 is significantly smaller and significantly faster and more agile. I mean, this thing can climb and potentially even jump short distances. So, obviously, the animal is described as being basically just under sauropods and how it has to move. It's very slow, very deliberate on land. It's going to be a lot less maneuverable, a lot less fast. But in the water, it's the complete opposite. Thermoradiosaurus is pretty much described as like a super predator in the water. These things hunt whales and massive schools of fish, so they have to be pretty agile to herd fish and stuff in the water. Though Indom 2.0 is stated to be able to swim due to its arms being confirmed to have tons of fast twitch muscles and being very similar to an ape in makeup, it ain't gonna swim that well, especially not anywhere near like the same level as the Thermoradiosaurus, which is adapted for water. It's very likely that it would struggle to swim in deeper waters and would only really be decently effective in relatively shallow water. So when it comes to maneuverability, it depends on where they're fighting, and if it's on land, of course the Indom takes it, but if it's in water, yeah, the Thermoradiosaurus is significantly more agile, so it's a draw for this. Next is a lot of people's favorite category, bite force. The thing that would usually determine a fight pretty often for dinosaurs. And this one is a little debatable, I guess, as due to the sheer size of the Thermoradiosaurus, it's going to have a significantly stronger bite than the real-life Spinosaur. Its snout is also described as relatively broad in comparison to a Spinosaur, at least its ancestors, so it probably also has that going for it, and it's also described as extremely muscular. It also would need a pretty strong bite to damage stuff like whales and elephants, both things it's confirmed to have hunted, and it's also stated to have been able to hunt megafauna during its time in the dinosaur era as well. So these things would have to have a pretty decent bite, probably somewhere around the difference between like a crocodile's jaws and a alligator's jaws in a way. But obviously this one has a stronger bite in this case. But I don't think its bite is actually matching the Indom 2.0, especially not pound for pound. Indom 2.0 is essentially a T-Rex with iron teeth, so it's kind of hard to beat that. Though I do think its bite would definitely be able to damage the Indom 2.0 extremely bad, I don't think it has a stronger bite overall. Though it's definitely a lot more impressive than you'd probably assume looking at it. So for bite force, Indom 2.0 would take it fairly easily. Now, auxiliary weapons in general. I'm not going to be counting X factors here. I'll save them for the end, but generally the Indom 2.0 has more effective weapons pound for pound, but the Spinosaur has the same stuff scaled up. So really saying either one has better weapons is a little strange, because it's like comparing a scorpion to a lobster in a way. So I'd hesitate to say Indom 2.0 takes weapons, because at the end of the day, despite having more effective claws for its size, getting smacked by a thing far larger than you is still going to do a lot more damage than something that had that same weapons at your size. Once again, it's like comparing a wolf to like a bear to something like a hyena. So I'd say it's extremely debatable, but I guess I'll give it to Indom 2.0 just because pound for pound, it likely has the better overall weapons unless they're in water, ignoring X Factor. Next we get the feats, and before some people start freaking out, I don't mean feats as in hey, they scale to 2 tons of TNT, so therefore they're in this general tier, or hey, they outsped this thing right here, so therefore they're this fast, or anything like that. I'm going off like what they've done. Like what you do in a tiger versus lion debate, talking about what these things hunt, what they can do, some impressive showings that these animals have, stuff like that. Not like Goku versus Superman, Goku shook Universe 7, which is a massive microcosm, or Superman beat the World Forger that one time. I'm not doing stuff like that. So, generally speaking, Indom 2.0 has a couple pretty good showings that we know it's capable of doing. For starters, it was able to wipe out the entire island. We don't know how many it took to do this. We can assume it probably took more than one. Actually, we can pretty much say for certain it did. But regardless, according to Goji Center themselves, a single Indom 2.0 can beat anything on the Jurassic World Island and in the Jurassic World Park. The only problem with this, and a lot of power scalers are going to mention this, is these don't scale to the ones we see in the movies very well. Well, they do, but they scale to what Goji Center thinks they scale to, not what people like me, or maybe someone like KOTM would say they scale to. So I'm not going to be over here arguing that Indom 2.0 scales to large building level because it's stronger than the Indom 1.0 according to Goji Center. I'm not going to be arguing it can bite through meter-thick steel either. I will argue that it can beat the Rexy we saw in Rexy vs. Sue, which is still impressive, but, again, we have to go off what Goji Center said. Therefore, sauropods in Jurassic World are under the ones in real life because they're docile. And the Tyrannosaurus Rexes in the verse are under the ones in real life because Rexy can't even hit Sue a single time. They're also smaller than they are canonically as well. So, yeah, we have to go off that logic. Which is still, it's still an impressive creature, but it's definitely more limited than it would be if you were going off the film's logic, which kind of goes out there. Regardless, though, this thing can hunt other large theropods like Rexy, potentially stuff like the Spinosaurus, and it's also been implied that it could fight the Ultimate Paratrix, and it will fight the Ultimate Paratrix in a 1v1 apparently. Well, I definitely think it's losing that for some obvious reasons. Still, fighting something that large and that dangerous with that much weapons in a 1v1 would be incredibly impressive for something that size, and doing any damage to it at all would be extremely impressive. So it could still fight things that are on the level of the real-life dinosaurs or above them. But generally speaking, it's fighting things that Goji Center themselves basically say is under real life. Whereas the Thermoradiosaurus is the opposite, it's just fighting real life stuff. Due to where it lived, it probably never actually interacted with something like T-Rex, but it still could have interacted with other large theropods. And it's actually been confirmed that it fought off other large predators. Not quite its own size, but just big stuff. Usually using its X factor, but it could still probably fight melee. It could hunt whales. It can hunt modern large animals like elephants. It has a lot of just general showings of being pretty impressive. We also know that it fought a lot of humans. There's even legends about it. Now, before I get into a lot of the stuff for the realistic Godzilla, there's something I need to mention about it. A lot of these are told through the lenses of it being a story. Well, some of them are documented historical events. Others are likely either exaggerated or not 100% true. The ones that are pretty much depicted as 100% did happen documented events are the incident in Rome and the incident in Chernobyl. The other instances, mostly legends, we don't exactly know how or what actually happened. I'll give my own interpretations of what probably did happen, but there are other things that are just we don't know for certain. So there is some assumptions that have to be made for this to make any sense, but regardless, a lot of these are probably exaggerations. So, but assuming nothing happened to cause them would be even stranger than assuming that something did happen, is my logic here. Starting off, we know that people have tried to hunt these realistic Godzillas throughout history multiple times and failed. We could assume that this one up probably mostly back in the day up until like maybe early 20th century, off the timeline we're given in the video. So off that alone, we know these things can handle and defeat people because no adult one of these has, from what we know, canonically ever died from humans. At least not humans actively attacking it. They might have died from human activities like overfishing, etc. But no human direct attack has ever killed one, only indirect stuff. Juveniles have been killed, but only via poisoning or trapping, never by straight up force. Obviously showing these things could handle early human weapons all the way up to like medieval ages and stuff like that. This is consistent with the incident in Rome. Essentially, a juvenile was trapped, put inside a big ass arena full of water, and then had to fight a bunch of people on little boats with nets and I believe harpoons or spears. Yeah, no, spears. It didn't go well for the people. We don't know exactly how many boats were involved in this. We know they were small, but not like tiny, and they were big enough to hold at least 2 or 3 people. And this thing pretty much beat everyone there and survived with almost no injuries, as the spears couldn't really pierce its hide. We also know that its X factor was powerful enough to boil large quantities of water within the arena, which is incredibly impressive, and potentially even destroy some of the boats, as it was strong enough to char the wood and blast them to like pieces. We also know this thing's attacks can severely injure and even kill other members of its own species. So they have to be pretty powerful. These things, X Factor's attacks. They can also burn entire schools of fish and can potentially even kill whales. These things were also able to, according to legends, boil entire armies alive. I don't think it actually did that, obviously. My interpretation would be that it was able to wipe out groups of soldiers with sprays of its attack, not entire armies. Or maybe just like little, like maybe just one by one wiping out a small group, like almost an army, but not quite an army. I don't think it ever fought a whole army one-on-one. Well, like 1v100 or anything like that. And then, according to other legends, it could capsize ships, like full-on ships. I do think that could be possible, but not through melee attacks, through use of its breath. If its breath can actually destroy small boats, it's possible it could break into parts of ships and flood them. If it could do that, that's obviously extremely impressive, but we don't exactly know if this actually happened or if this is just legends. If it was smaller ships, I could 100% see it just capsizing them physically. These things are around the same size as some smaller species of whale. Actually, larger than some smaller species of whale, actually. So these things could definitely damage and capsize a ship if it really wanted to. Just not really big ships without some effort or potentially the X factor. So with all that out of the way, which one is more impressive overall when it comes to feats? And in my opinion, I believe it has to be Thermoradiosaurus. These guys are just, generally speaking, considered like the top tiers of nature's natural apex predators. Like, nothing really rivals them on land or in water. The only things I think could even challenge them in real life currently would be a whole pack of orcas. And even then, these things are still hunting whales, so they don't seem too bothered by the competition. Whereas Indom 2.0, though it's definitely impressive and has fought pretty much very similar stuff to what Thermoradiosaurus has fought, it hasn't done as much as a singular individual, whereas a juvenile one of these was able to take on a large group of people and beat them relatively easily while they were all armed. And juveniles of this species have never been brought down by humans and are still ranked as some of the strongest things in natural history. Whereas Indominus, though incredibly dangerous and obviously like one of the stronger things out there, still hasn't actually like done anything super impressive as a singular individual. So for that alone, I'm going to have to say that Thermoradiosaurus is the more impressive when it comes to raw showings. Finally, we get to the X factor. And for Indom 2.0, there's technically 2, but one of them is rendered null here as it's a 1v1. First one is obviously the offspring. These things can just multiply like rapidly, like gremlins. Obviously, if this was a long war between two species, that would play a major part. But this is a 1v1, so we'll kind of ignore that here until a later scenario. The other X factor is their venom. Their venom is extremely dangerous and can definitely damage anything it bites, just due to the sheer size of the creature and the volume of venom that would be pumped into it. Now, it has to land a good bite, or at least land a bite in general to actually do this. Though if it does get a good bite in, and it does land that, it's going to do significant damage to a creature, even one as large as Thermoradiosaurus. Obviously, it's a pretty insane X factor. But there's another X factor for the other creature, that being Thermoradiosaurus's atomic breath. It is not like Godzilla's atomic breath in the actual films. It's not shooting a literal beam of pure radiation and like plasma and all the other things we've seen the atomic breath be stated to be made of, even though its properties switch from every movie and every shot almost. In this, the atomic breath is the best way I can describe this creature's atomic breath, or chemical spray as it's sometimes called, or chemical blast, I guess, is essentially what had happened if you took a bombardier beetle, made it radioactive with radioactive sands and microbial mats, and then made a creature with a bunch of insane adaptions to fire this stuff out while mixing seawater. The video by Creature Archives explains it far better than I just did, like significantly better. You should watch it, definitely. But essentially, it's about as close as you can get to a real-life atomic breath. And according to what we hear in the video, it's extremely dangerous. It could char wood, it could potentially kill other members of its own species, it could damage large predators, basically injure them severely badly. It's able to destroy small boats, maybe even capsize large ships. And it can boil extremely large quantities of water, burn entire schools of fish, damage and potentially kill whales, wipe out other predators in the water. It can do a lot of things, and it's extremely dangerous no matter how you slice it. Could it kill the Indominus 2.0? Yeah, if it gets a good shot on the head, I could see it basically one-shotting an Indom. Regardless, this thing has multiple shots of it, and it can easily refuel. So, getting close to it is the big problem for the Indominus. Though it is more agile and a lot faster, you still have to get close and not get shot with a ranged attack that can go several dozen meters, potentially even further. Though weaker blasts only go a couple meters, from what the video states, this thing can essentially turn into like a sniper if it really has to. Not literally shooting miles, but still shooting significantly large distances. Meaning it can hit the Indom before the Indom's even close to it. Which makes its X Factor extremely dangerous. So, with all that out of the way, which one do I think would win a 1v1 between two average individuals, adult individuals of each species? I'm going to have to go with the realistic Godzilla here, for a few reasons. For one, although the Indom 2.0 could definitely kill one if it got on its back, maybe, or like got really close and was able to bite it with its venom, or even just deliver a pretty powerful bite to the neck, it could kill one. The only problem is it's going to struggle to get close, and it's at risk of dying before it even turns into a melee fight. Whereas the Thermonucleosaurus, or, Radiosaurus, can literally just one-shot the Indom from a pretty significant distance away. Even if it turns melee, it still has a size advantage, and its weapons can be just as deadly as the Indom's. Though slower, if the fight takes a turn and goes into the water, it's no contest. There's just more ways that the Radiosaurus could win in comparison to Indom 2.0. The Indom has one win con: hit close fast and deliver a good hit fast. And even that's not perfect, whereas the Radiosaurus can win two ways pretty easily, either by sniping it from a pretty significant distance away, or taking the fight to the water in any capacity. And it could still win a melee fight if it really had to, due to the size gap, as any hit it lands due to its sheer size could potentially be fatal. So, yeah, I think that the Radiosaurus just has more going for it here than the Indom 2.0. Which leads to the next two scenarios. When it comes to juvenile versus juvenile, 1v1, it's the same situation but worse. Juvenile members of the Radiosaurus species are still fairly large, at like 50 plus feet long, and it was a juvenile that did all that crazy stuff in Rome. So, a juvenile Indominus, which is significantly smaller, small enough to fit inside buildings, isn't going to do too hot here no matter how you slice it. Even if it got on the Radiosaurus's back, it's likely just getting flung off. And Radiosaurus would be faster as a juvenile than it is as an adult, so the speed edge of the juvenile Indom isn't even as useful here. And again, if the fight gets taken to the water, or if it blasts the Indom, it's pretty much over. And then if it's an Indom with a bunch of offspring versus the amped up realistic Godzilla we saw in Chernobyl, this one's a little closer. But the big problem here is the fight would have to take place in Chernobyl, which is this thing's hunting ground. It's its home, essentially. And it's going to be near water regardless. The juveniles If they get close, their venom and their just sheer numbers could definitely overwhelm even the strongest Thermoradiosaurus of all time, but it's unlikely that they could get close to begin with, because this thing is specifically able to fire its attacks faster and with a lot more power. Meaning this thing is essentially like a beam spammer in like Kaiju Universe or something. It's not something you'd want to fight. It would also likely target the adult first. And if the fight takes a turn and goes to the water, yeah, it's kind of over. At least with this scenario, though, I could see this being a win for the Indom if they simply jump the Thermoradiosaurus on land. But even then, with just how powerful this particular member of the species is, I don't see him going down without taking a few Indoms with him. So with all that said, yeah, I think the realistic Godzilla beats the Indominus 2.0. I think in this version of a T-Rex versus the Spinosaurus actually wins. With all that said, if you guys enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Check out both channels that these creatures come from, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.